The fire movement's dead? What you need to know.
Brian, I am so excited about this because I love when we can talk about this. Not specifically the FIRE movement per se, but I love when we can talk about financial independence. And I think that there are a lot of thoughts and theories out there about what FIRE is and what FIRE looks like. And then I think there's the reality of how it has morphed, in our opinion. It's changed a little bit over the years.
Well, look, I think we get a bad reputation and we just leaned into it. Why not? Let's go ahead and give them some fuel. But I do want to give some kudos in the fact that I like when FIRE came on the scene, and in a minute you're going to find out that a lot of this stuff was timeless. Mm-hmm. FIRE just kind of popularized some and branded in a way that people attach to. But I do love that this was a catalyst for a lot of discussions where people, because I think the default for most Americans is they ignore their financial life, and then they're sort of shocked when they get close to retirement and they realize, holy cow. So it's exactly, I love the magnifying glass that the FIRE movement has done to really get people moving and thinking about their financial lives.
And so what we want to do is we're going to talk through the FIRE movement. We're going to talk about the highlights of it, some of the setbacks, and specifically how it's evolved, in our opinion, over the past couple of years. And in our opinion, we think that it's evolved for the better. And we are, in true money guy fashion, we're going to round out the show by giving you the actual numbers. If this is something that you are aspiring to, and you're aspiring to do it by a certain age, we're going to walk you through actually how to do it, how to get there. But let's do some vocabulary first, Brian, right? For those of you who maybe are not familiar, maybe you're just stumbling onto financial content for the first time, when we say the FIRE movement, we're talking about this movement of folks that stand for financial independence, retire early. Who are these people, Brian?
Yeah, these are people, it's typically known for a group of people. They want to own their time. They want to, kind of know what they're doing. And there's also a lot of them are saving large sums of money. I'm talking about 40 to 70% of their earnings. And look, let me do this teacher style. The F, financial, who can be wrong with, like I said, I love the spotlight on that. I for independence.
Sounds good to me.
I'm all about building up and owning your time that much sooner. Retire? Okay, when, where, how. I need to make sure you have the abundance figured out of knowing who you are, what you value, what your purpose is. And then the early, maybe. I mean, this is the parts where I think that we have to kind of lean into, why did people get so bought into FIRE and retire early? What are these people identifying actually with?
I think there's a few common goals that these folks have. This is what they really want. A lot of folks want to leave their job. They do not like what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, and they want to figure out, how can I get away from this thing that I'm doing? Other folks want to own their time. They say, hey, if I could just retire, if I could just not have to clock into the 9 to 5, then I would be able to control what I do with my time, where I go, when I go, how I go. Some people just want to do it because they want more options. They want to say, hey, what FIRE will do for me is it will allow me to be in the driver's seat where I get to control life and not let life control me. And it will give them enough financial security to pursue their next project, whatever that may be. And we're going to kind of talk a little bit about that, because I think that's where the nuance is. I think that's where the special sauce is that has caused some things to change.
Well, and I think if you go through this list, I respect every one of these things. And I think that what actually is the awesome part of this is the financial independence.
That's it. Yep.
If you can understand that and really start setting your sights, putting the goals, knowing where you need to be, that is powerful stuff. But let's now kind of pivot to what didn't work. Why do we think that this thing has obviously changed, modified, and evolved over the years?
Well, the whole idea was retire early. That means at a young age. That means I'm going to exit the workforce. I'm going to move into a stage of life that most folks don't move into until they are well into their 60s or maybe even their 70s. But I, as a FIRE proponent, want to do that earlier, in my 30s or 40s or 50s. Well, what happens is when you do that, you're not factoring in that there are a lot of life changes that take place in those 40s, 50s, and 60s. I mean, Brian, if you just think about the last decade of your life, how many things have changed since the day that you turned 40 to the day that you turn 50. And how many of those things were things that you had not even thought of, that weren't even really on your radar?
Well, some of the prominent fire advocates and social media people, they did this to the extreme. They saved incredible amounts, 50, 70% of their income. But then a few of them even built up enough. They were so successful building. They left in their 30s, if not even early 40s. But a lot of them, like I'm of the age now, my oldest is in college. I still have one in the house that I'm paying for school. She's got some challenges, so we have to even send her to a specialized school. You can imagine if you start doing this and you leave the workforce when you're in your 30s or 40s, your kids, that messy middle, there's a reason we've coined that. Life can humble you in a lot of ways. And that's why a lot of the prominent people that were out there have gone back or pivoted from the retire early, is because between daycare, between college, between all the things that they weren't thinking about with all the life changes, the vision for what was success changed.
That's exactly right. And what happened is that there was this laser focus on frugality and living a small life. And while that might be possible for folks who are in their 60s, who are in their 70s, who have adult children, who are in a stable season of life that likely won't change a ton, that's a hard thing to really be able to project well for someone in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. Because you may think that you have that small life and that frugal footprint figured out, but then you have health changes. The kids decide they got to go to college. You have some financial setbacks. You decide that you want to change locations. All of these things really throw a big wrench into all those best laid plans that you had in your 20s and 30s.
Well, I love them. When I think about frugality and small life, everybody knows there was a period of time where we were tightwad nation and all these things. But I have found, and I was I could squeeze every ounce of water out of rocks when I was in my earlier years. I was the kid in high school with the $7 date night, the George Costanza coupon wallet, because we didn't have all the internet stuff that we did now. But it is one of those things. So I was tight, but I was just joking the other day because we're planning a vacation with the kids this summer. And we were telling the travel agent, I've just gotten so old that I'm picky. I want things. So when you build your life when you're young on frugality and living a small life, you can do that while you're young, but you will find there's this human condition where it just changes. So I would encourage you to recognize your older self might not be as tolerant as your younger self, because it's just that's just kind of the human condition. There's a reason we talk about the old men on the front porch yelling at the kids to get off the front lawn. It's just I'm not hardened, but I definitely know what I like, and I know what I value, and I kind of want my financial life to reflect that.
And
too.
so I think in that exact same vein, what ended up happening with proponents of the FIRE movement is they put way too much emphasis on this idea of retirement. They could get their minds wrapped around the quantitative decisions that were necessary to achieve this goal. But what they lost focus of were the qualitative decisions that needed to be made and the qualitative thoughts that needed to go into making this successful. It was all science and no art. And they figured that out too late in the game. And I think because of that, a lot of folks who had this dream and this vision for what this season of life would be have recognized that maybe that's not exactly what's there.
Yeah, too much emphasis on retirement is a big deal. Now, I will tell you, this is the positive part. Like I said, this thing is evolving. Sure. There are more and more people who have put a lot of effort not only on the quantitative, and I talk about that. There's a lot of people that focus only on the math. If you're analytical, if you're nerdy like we are, it's easy to get caught up in if this number will solve all my life things. Well, fortunately, there's been people who have now walked the walk, and they have started recognizing, hey, we need to focus on the qualitative stuff, just like you were talking about. And we even have some stats on this. If you just focus on retirement, if you look into who are retirees, are they happy? Are they doing this as the best version of themselves? It is sad that almost a third, or 28% of retirees, are more depressed. And it's not the finances. It's not the finances that are driving that. That is showing that there's an indicator that we need to focus on something just beyond the numbers.
So if that's the case, if it's not just mathematics, if it's not just dollars, what do happy retirees need? Well, again, there have been tons of research done on this, And we actually know one of the things that retirees need in order to have a successful, and we're going to call it retirement for the moment, but to have a successful period of life here, besides money, one is just simply maintaining healthy relationships and understand they still have to build relationships even to and through this season of life.
Yeah. And, one of the things we talk about is when we're working with wealth management clients, a lot of us great builders of wealth, the savers and accumulators, already have a hard time going from builder to consumer, because that's just so alter what we've done our entire working life. The same thing happens when you enter retirement. And that's why I do want to give a shout out, I love that when we were putting this all together, one of the the two resources that we really leaned on was Fritz over at Retirement Manifesto. Yep. He walked the walk. He has the wisdom. He did the experience himself. And then, of course, Wes Moss. Yep. He wrote the book, What the Happiest Retirees Know. We've done some content with Wes. And it is amazing that if you think about maintaining and building relationships, some of the data that came out of the research of those two was 3.6 close friends is kind of an indicator of a successful retirement.
That's
you
what
have relationships.
And what happens so often is these builders and accumulators, all of their friends, all of their social network, all of their social structure is through their employment. It's the people that they work next to and alongside. Well, all of a sudden, when employment changes, you don't recognize, so too does your social structure. And so if you've not accounted for that, what you can find is that this season, this station of life, can be very lonely and very isolating.
Yeah, well, I think marriages will go through a transition too. Yeah. I mean, you never know what the reality of a joke is or how much of that joke, because all jokes, to make them funny, they have to have a touch of truth to them so it connects with us as humans. But how often do you hear spouses talk about, man, I don't know what I'm going to do when they're home retired all day with me?
Yeah.
And so that is one of those things, and that's why if you look in the stats, that 35% of divorces in 2020 were couples age 55 plus.
It's not people at the beginning of their life stage. It's not people at the beginning of their journey. These are folks that have been together for a while, entering into a new station of life.
And what about single people, Bo? What does the research show on that?
Yeah, so it's really, really interesting that if you look at retirees, it is not uncommon that single retirees are 4.5 times more likely to be unhappy than married retirees. Now, again, that's not prescriptive. Yeah. It's just looking at the numbers. And so it would suggest that folks who understand relationships and how to maintain and build those in this station and season of life have a higher probability of it being a happy time for them, not one of the 28% or 1/3 of retirees that are actually depressed.
Yeah, I look at these as reality check stats. I don't want this to be what happens to you. It's just, but I've known from several of our friends that have been part of the FIRE movement, it is unique that when you leave the workforce, a lot of those relationships go away. So you do need to lean into heavily, who are your friend sets? How firm is your relationship with your significant other? Do y'all have activities? Do you have things that you do together? Because all those things, and that's probably a great transition to talk about, and this is something I know when we had Wes on the show, we talked a lot about. What are your hobbies? What are the purpose or the fun things you do outside of work?
Again, in the research that was done, they found that happy retirees have 3.6 core pursuits, something that they are working for or working towards. Unhappy retirees only have 1.9. So they have one thing, maybe two things to focus on, but outside of those things, there's not a lot of stuff occupying them. Well, when you retire, or when you enter into this station of life, you're going to have more time than you've likely had for the last 10, 20, 30 years. You need to understand, okay, what am I going to fill that time with? One of the things that we've seen for early retirees, as well as just normal retirees that do not enter into it successfully, is they finally hit their last day and they wake up the next day and they sleep in for the next week and they wake up and they look around and say, okay, now what? Now what am I going to do? Oh my goodness, how am I going to fill my days? I did not recognize that every day was going to feel like Saturday. I don't like this. If you can figure that out before you enter this season, there's a really high probability you're going to be a much happier retiree.
Well, I think this is from, once again, conversations we've had, and I love that the stats support this, is that a lot of people, you especially you get a group of people together, and it's one of the first 3 to 4 questions is, what do you do?
What do you do for a living? Yep.
And I think that it is weird, because I already said that a lot of your work relationships fall off. It's probably weird if you're surrounded, you're the same age as your peers, but you're younger and you're in a different financial situation and you've chosen to go a different path. what is your purpose? What's your identity? And I think that's something that's hard. And that's why when we looked into the data, it showed that 97% of retirees who are happy have a strong sense of purpose.
And I think they figured out the abundance part.
They know what the happy. They've actually made it to that abundance level. It's not just the freedom of they have enough money. They actually know who they are, what they value, and what gives them purpose in the morning. When they wake up, they actually know what they're put on this earth to do. That's something I think a lot of people, you got to get beyond the math of the situation and find that abundance.
And then the last thing, and this is what we think the studies have found also, here's what happy retirees need. They need to have healthy habits. Happy retirees regularly did low-cost exercises like walking, swimming, biking, hiking, and they remained active with volunteering, which would be like purposeful work, or socializing, which would be like relational work. They found ways to stay active. When they asked unhappy retirees, hey, how do you spend your days? What are the things that you do? They said they had passive habits, watching TV, staying at home, not going out, not interacting. So if you want to prepare for this season and station of life, make sure that you're not just paying attention to the dollars and cents, but also to your health and maintaining a healthy lifestyle.
Well, I love this is because look, we are optimists. We do positive content. I feel like there's been a lot of the two guys on the Muppets up above, yelling down insults at the crew. Let's actually talk about, because I want to talk, because this is all positive. I think FIRE has evolved.
Absolutely.
It is definitely it's in a new phase of it. Now, I love that some of the content creators that we follow are part of this update to the movement that's given it a lot more purpose, beginning with the end in mind, not only on the financial stuff, but also the abundance thoughts that need to go into it. Can we talk about what has changed and where are we headed?
Yeah, right now, we used to think, okay, financial independence, retire early. It's a singular thing. But now it's way more customized. There's fat financial independence. There's skinny financial independence. There's coast financial independence. There's barista financial independence. There's slow financial independence. So there are ways that this movement has now customized, recognizing that there is more than just this one-size-fits-all approach. There has to be something a little more custom so that my situation, what I'm looking for, is actually reflected in the plan that I have. I mean, one of the things that I think is so great, so often the FIRE movement got focused on what am I leaving behind, what's behind me, what's behind me, what's behind me. One of the ways we think that's evolved really, really well is that it's now focused on what's next.
Yeah, and that's what it's now leaning into the mental, psychological, the behavioral, all the things of what you're going to versus just having that math calculation of what you can do to leave your work. And what I like when I talk about the leaders, and the new name for this is that's starting to evolve, is financial independence next endeavor.
The FINE movement.
Yeah, the FINE movement.
That.
Which
and
look, there's been, and I want to give some shout outs because I think FINE was coined by Jill Schlesinger.
Jill Schlesinger,
and then the other thing and y'all heard me give the shout out to this because we of course know these guys, and I've had conversations with Jason. He has financial independence, recreational employment. So he still he kept the outline of FIRE, but he pivoted on the retire early to the recreational employment. These things, and what I love is they're focusing on where you're going to, the plan of who you are, the purpose, the abundance. So that's why this is nice. This is positive that we're seeing these people give the elements, the experience shares of how to do this the right way.
And what I love is this is not a new concept. This is what we have been counseling our clients through for the last 20 years. This is ultimately what they've been working towards, whether it was retirement at 45, 50, 55, 60, 65. It was less about the thing that they were leaving. It was more about building up an abundant amount of resources where whatever their next endeavor was, they were prepared for that and they knew what that was. Maybe it was volunteering. Maybe it was career 2.0. Maybe it was figuring out whatever those things are. It's something that we've been saying since the beginning of the firm. And I think now the financial independence retire early movement has begun adopting to that. Okay, it's not just about being young and unemployed. It's about being young and in control of what I'm doing for my next station, next chapter in life.
Yeah, financial independence, owning my time that
That's
much
it.
sooner. That's where it's at. So let's talk about kind of why fine. We've believed about the purpose, paying less, but you'll need to know a way to cover your income. And I think this leads to where all of you analytical people, you're going to love this. We're essentially giving you an all-you-can-eat buffet of what are these steps or the math of the situation so you can have a successful fine adjustment.
So fine adjustment, I like that. So here's what step one is. You have to know how much you need to cover. You need to understand if you are thinking about financial independence and your next endeavor, odds are when you move to this next endeavor, your circumstances are going to change. Maybe your income goes away altogether, or maybe it doesn't. Maybe your income just goes down $25,000, $50,000, maybe it cuts in half. Well, you need to understand that if I want to maintain a specific lifestyle, what are the expenses that I need my pot of dollars to cover? So we're actually going to walk through the mathematics to show you, okay, if my expenses are $25,000 that I know I need to cover to make this shift, how much money do I need to have? What if I need to replace $50,000 of expenses? What if I need to cover $75,000? Then what if I need to cover $100,000 of expenses? And what we're going to show you is the mathematics required to get to those expense covering numbers so that whatever your next endeavor is can make up the difference. And you can define what that means for you.
So we have different dollar amount of expenses that need to be covered. We also, in step 2, we talked about how to cover it. Mm-hmm. Look, a big impact besides just how much you need to cover in expenses? What's your age? Mm-hmm. Because you definitely, look, all the controversy over the last few months over safe withdrawal rates and all those things, I love that this is the component where we adjust what the safe withdrawal rate is, because we've all heard of the 4%,
Sure.
the Trinity study and things like that. There are ways to take this into account so it's customized based upon your age and needs as well.
Yeah, the 4% rule is used to determine how much a retiree can withdraw from their retirement portfolio each year. It comes from a historical study that was done. It was conducted in 1994 that found there was no historical case where a 4% withdrawal rate exhausted a retirement portfolio in less than 33 years. But they were looking at traditional retirements. They were looking at folks that were retiring in their 60s. So it changed a little bit. Now, I do think there are some points of clarification we ought to make as it relates to the 4% rule. It's 4% of your portfolio at retirement. So you don't recalculate every year based off of portfolio growth or decline. So what you're essentially saying when you're using the 4% rule is, if I have $1 million at retirement, I'm going to pull out $40,000 adjusted for inflation each year. It's not like if the account goes up 50% or down 50%, I'm adjusting my withdrawal rates, because that's unrealistic. It wouldn't work that way. 4% rule also assumed an inflation adjustment, that your withdrawals would increase each year with some stated rate of inflation that you assumed. And in reality, though, and this is the part that I think is beautiful, 4% rule is great as like back of the napkin rule of thumb.
Exactly.
But it's not one size fits all.
No, I mean, a real financial plan, as you get closer, I would encourage anybody who gets into that 5 to 10 year band of being close to actual landing the airplane and walking away from your day job, you've got to be stress testing. You've got to actually go beyond just napkin math. But these things are great while you're young and you're vision casting where you want to be. I love safe withdrawal rates for that type of plan, because it's hard when you're young and you have 15, 20 years to really know where it's going to be, because we know changing just 1% here or a year or 2 years here is going to have dramatic
Big
impacts. So the reality of financial planning is you've got to be running Monte Carlo simulations. You've got to run all the different scenarios so you can take into account life changes. And you need to be serious and go beyond just doing napkin plans.
And in practice, what we do is we don't have static withdrawal rates for our clients either. There might have, for a season, it might be a 4% withdrawal rate, but then for a season, it might be 6.5%. And then for the next season, it might be 2.5%. And it varies through time. So this is not a customized plan. This is back of the napkin math. But maybe you're curious, all right, well, how do I do it? What's the mathematics behind the back of the napkin math? Well, here it is. If you just want to use the 4% rule, here's how you calculate what you need in your portfolio. You take your annual retirement expenses. What do I think I'll need in retirement? Let's say it's $50,000. You divide by 0.04. That tells you how big your portfolio needs to be. Well, how can you calculate what you can actually take out yearly? Take your retirement portfolio, multiply it times 0.04. Generally speaking, when those two numbers intersect, that's when you're at financial independence. When your retirement portfolio can substantiate the retirement living expenses you need, you would argue that you've reached the financial independence point.
Wait a minute. Don't get too far ahead of us, because this is a typical 30-year retirement.
That's right.
Somebody who's retiring at 65. That is how the 4% rule kind of with Trinity study all worked out. But as I've already previewed, FIRE movement, or people who are even part of this new FIND movement, are now, they're thinking about this in much broader terms, 40 years, 50 years, and beyond.
Certainly more than 33.
What does that actually do to the safe withdrawal rate?
Yeah, so what we said is, hey, it probably ought to be it should be a fluid number based on how long you think that your retirement is going to last. So we did a Money Guy adjustment to it, and we said what we're going to do is we're going to lower your withdrawal percentage by 0.25%, by 0.25% for every 5 years that you retire early. Don't worry, don't do math. We're going to give you the numbers. So if you want to retire at 65, a 4% withdrawal rate works. But if you're thinking about retiring or leaving the workforce or having your portfolio cover some level of your expenses for the remainder of your life, and you want that at 55, then you got to think about a 3.5% withdrawal rate. If you want your portfolio to subsidize your living expenses starting at age 45, it's going to be a 3% withdrawal rate. And if you're someone who's 35 years old, but you want your portfolio to subsidize your current living expenses for the remainder of your life, and you want to ensure that it'll last, we think that you ought to use a safe withdrawal rate of 2.5% for that chunk of your assets to make sure that it lasts.
Yeah, when you are putting that much stress, because like we've already shared, there's a lot of life that happens when you're making this decision at 35, 45, and even 50 years of age. So you need to make sure you're taking that adjustment into the conservative assumptions as you're doing your napkin plan.
Now remember, what we're not suggesting is that a 35-year-old here is going to leave the workforce forever. We're going to show you why those numbers are difficult. What we are suggesting is that it is possible to build a pot of money that will replace a certain portion of your expenses in perpetuity. And that's what we want to educate you on. If you are thinking about your next endeavor, when can I leave the thing that I'm doing now to move to the thing that I want to be doing then, we're going to give you the numbers to be able to do that. But then you got to make it to step 3. You got to actually figure out, how do I calculate the number?
Yeah, well, luckily we've done this for you guys. Let me tell you what we're going to be covering as we cover this calculator that we put together for scenarios. Is that we're going to talk about, we did a 30-year-old who hypothetically is either making this decision for 40, 45, 50, and 55. So you can imagine the person who's 30 and wants to make the decision in 40. 10 years, it's going to put a lot on your savings rate. But somebody who's thinking about doing this at 50 and they're 30 years of age right now, that 20 years, it's going to be less. It's going to let them have some compounding working behind them. And then we even broke this out by different expense levels. Bo kind of alluded to this already. We're going to cover expenses $25,000, $50,000, $75,000, $100,000 and show you the numbers by age for each of those stratifications of covered expenses. And then we're also going to break this into how you make this perpetual. Because I think that, look, a lot of you, and we said this part earlier, you might just be trying to cover $25,000 because you just want to go in a different direction. It's not that you're expecting that you're going to still be working. That's why we focused on the expenses, not the income you were making.
That's exactly right. So if you're someone who right now you're in the height of your earnings potential and you're making $100,000 a year, but you're thinking about that next endeavor, we want to show you if you need to replace $50,000 of expenses so that you can just go out and make $25,000, $50,000 a year, we're going to show you the numbers necessary to do that so that that covering of expense can last for the remainder of your life. So let's look at the actual number. So let's assume that you're a 30-year-old and you want to shift your next endeavor at 40. If you want to be able to cover $25,000 of your living expenses in perpetuity, by the time you get to 40, you need to have saved about $909,000. So almost $1 million to cover $25,000 of living expenses for the rest of your life. If you're starting saving for this goal at 30, you got to save almost $5,000 a month for that decade to be able to get there. That's a pretty hard charge.
Well, we put here's some assumptions that were kind of built into this. It's got a very conservative safe withdrawal rate of 2.75%.
Yep.
I mean, because look, you're 30, thinking about doing this at 40, you want to be conservative. And we did an 8% rate of return. And you can see these numbers jump up. If you're a 40-year-old trying to do 50, I mean, by 30, by 40, I said that all wrong. If you're a 30-year-old by 40 years of age, you want to replace $50,000 and cover that many expenses, you're going to need to have little under $2 million or $1,818,000 and be saving close to $10,000 a month. That's why these numbers,
these are
you
hard.
have to
these
be,
are hard.
I mean, a person that can, remember this, the indicator for this movement is people who are saving 40 to 70% of their income. So a lot of them are going to look at these numbers and go, yeah, this is what we do.
Now, Brian, you said something so interesting as we were going through show prep, and I think it's worth noting because we're talking about a 30-year-old who's thinking about their next endeavor by 40. Well, if you're a 30-year-old and you're thinking, man, I can only do what I'm doing for 10 more years, you're still relatively early on in your financial working life journey. Are you so sure that you want to bring on the pain necessary to be able to do this by 40? Or should you consider a shift right now to, hey, what if I just found something that I enjoy more, that I have more passion for, that is more fulfilling to me? Could I just shift and do that now? And maybe I do that for the next 20 years, the next 25 years, the next 30 years. If you're someone who's 30 and you're already looking for the exits at 40, maybe you're not doing the thing right now that you ought to be doing. Anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I would just, you kind of do an incremental analysis on, opportunity cost versus time and passion. Because I think, our firm is the perfect example. We do have some people who were so good at accumulating that worked in the medical field, were engineers and other things. And they said, you know what, I'm going to save and build because I think I love this financial stuff. I'd love to be a financial advisor. Yep. And they kind of pivoted to their own version of this FINE movement. But then there's other people that came to us from careers where they were only a few years into retail management or other things, where they're like, you know what, I just can't do this anymore. And I'm not going to wait the 10 to 15 years that I'd have to save and gut it out in this job that, yes, pays well, but I just don't like. So they pivoted. They went ahead and just pivoted now and said, well, let me build my wealth in doing something where I'm not, it's that whole whistling to work every day instead of going to the salt mines to try to build my next endeavor that I'm building to.
All right, so for those of you out there listening on Spotify or iTunes, I'm going to give you the numbers. If you want to be able to replace $25,000 of expenses by 40, you need almost $900,000. $50,000 of expenses by 40, you need about $1.8 million. If you want to replace $75,000 of expenses by 40, $2.7 million. And if you need to replace $100,000 of expenses in perpetuity, you have to have over a $3.6 million portfolio by 40.
If I could whistle, that would have been like, whew.
That's hard. That's hard.
That was a big number. I can't whistle.
So let's shift now. What if you're a 30-year-old? You don't think, okay, I'm not going to do this for 10 years. I'm going to give it a good 15. What if I want to exit or find my next endeavor by 45? Well, if your goal is to find your next endeavor by 45, and you need to cover $25,000 of expenses in perpetuity, by age 45, you will need to have saved about $830,000. So now the numbers are coming down. Okay, 15 years, maybe I can get there. What it's going to require, if you're starting from zero at age 30, you got to save about $2,400 a month. Again, that assumes a 3% safe withdrawal and an 8% rate of return on your dollars.
Yeah, this one it's starting to seem a little more reasonable. When I look at all the monthly investments, I mean, you can see we're between $2,400 a month all the way up to a little less than $10,000, depending upon where your income is. That is actually somewhat doable because you've given yourself 15 years. And remember, building wealth is a slow, deliberate process. And that's why when we were covering the 30-year-old who wants to make a change at 40, you're just not giving yourself a lot of runway. It's no different than when we did the show on how do you build $1 million in 10 years. It puts a lot on that behavioral side that you have to really live a modest lifestyle to save at that high of a percentage. But you're going to see as we keep going further out, because we're getting close, and I'll save it for when we get to the 30-year-old who's thinking about making a transition at 50. This is when I think about myself, the younger version of myself, and some of my dreams.
All right, so I'm going to give you the numbers. To replace $25,000 of expenses at age 45, you need a portfolio of about $830,000. To replace $50,000 of expenses in perpetuity at age 45, you need about $1.7 million. To replace $75,000 of expenses at age 45, your portfolio would need to be about $2.5 million. And if you wanted to replace $100,000 of expenses at age 45 and you're starting at age 30, you would need a portfolio of a little over $3.3 million to do so. So that's a 30-year-old that has a 15-year time horizon exiting at 45. Let's talk, Brian, now about someone who wants to leave the workforce at 50. This resembles what you thought you were going to be.
Yeah, I mean, even in my 20s, I always thought by the age of 50, I was going to tap out of doing whatever I was doing. And what I love is I made those hard behavioral and discipline decisions at a young age. So I was leveraging the value of time, leveraging the wealth multiplier effect of compounding growth, so that as I got older and really fine-tuned my life and realized who I am, what I value, what gives me purpose, there is no way in the world that I'm leaving the workforce now, but I was already doing fine movements, or the FIRE movement, if you think about, some of the new pivots or evolutions that have occurred. And that's what I want for people, is because you can look at these numbers from a 30-year-old who's thinking about, who starts at 0 at 30 and then wants to have this big transition at 50. These numbers seem
these are doable.
Really doable. And this is the part where you're giving yourself enough time. Remember, this is a component of time that people just lose focus on. We know the typical millionaire now look, this is not savings rates of 40 to 70% like the typical FIRE person or fine person, but the typical retirement person who retires in a normal retirement age, it takes them 28 years or age 49 before they cross into seven figures. So that 28 years is something that probably has some value when you look at this. So 30 to 50, and Bo, I'll let you go through the numbers. This seems very doable. And this is also when you're 50, you kind of have made it through a lot of the life transitions. I'm at this stage, and I have a child in college. My youngest is in the house, but she's about to be in high school. There's a lot of life that has started, the concrete of what has made my life what it is has started to set where I can see where things are going.
So if you need to subsidize $25,000 of living expenses starting at age 50, you would need a portfolio of about $770,000. To cover $50,000 of expenses, you would need about $1.5 million. To cover $75,000 of expenses starting at age 50, you need about $2.3 million. And if you need to cover $100,000 of living expenses in perpetuity, you would need about a $3 million portfolio by the time you get to 50. The safe withdrawal rate we're assuming here is 3.25%. And again, we're using an 8% rate of return, assuming that's what your dollars can earn as you're building.
And then we'll close out with the 30-year-old who thinks they want to just walk away at 55.
Again, more reasonable.
I mean, now you got 25 years for your army of dollars to build, recruit, and just build upon themselves over the long term with compounding growth. These numbers are very doable. I mean, because now you have really leveraged the value of your time, letting the money work harder than you can with your back, your brain, or your hands. Bo, give them the numbers on this.
Yeah, if you are a 30-year-old who wants to go to your next endeavor by 55 and you want to replace $25,000 of living expenses, you would need a portfolio a little over $714,000. To replace $50,000 of living expenses, portfolio right about $1.4 million. To replace $75,000 of living expenses in perpetuity, about $2.1 million. And if you'd like to replace $100,000 of your living expenses starting at age 55, you'd need a portfolio of about a little over $2.8 million.
Those numbers are still big, but here's where this gets easier. And it's almost like you grease the skids. This thing's going to line up much easier because you gave yourself the time, what I was alluding to. Your monthly for the $25,000 of covered expenses, $751 a month.
That's doable.
If you think about, okay, you need twice that much. You need $50,000 of covered expenses. Well, at age 55, that's $1,502 a month. For people who are used to saving 40 to 70% of their income, this probably seems like easy sauce right now. And then you think about $75,000 is a little over $2,200 a month. For somebody who wants to have $100,000 a month of covered expenses, you need to be saving $3,000 a month. All of that sounds completely reasonable. And I think that's why I get excited, because you are buying and owning your life that much sooner. You have options.
I think what's beautiful is there's not a one size fits all. Whether you're part of the FIRE movement or whether you're part of the FINE movement, what you need to understand is that there's more than just math. There's more than just the calculation and computation of how many dollars do I need to save. It's a bigger qualitative conversation you need to have with yourself so you understand what it is that you are working towards and what is the why that you're working towards that thing. And if you can figure that out early on and you can stay the course, not only will you find that the destination is pretty exciting, you might actually find, man, this journey is not nearly as bad as I thought it would be. And maybe you wake up in Brian's position and said, hey, at 50, I'm out of the workforce. And you get to 50 and you say, you guys couldn't kick me out if you brought an army with you because I love what I get to do every single day.
Yeah, I made the joke in the content meeting that I'm going to do this for at least another 28 years before y'all force me to run for president like everybody else who's running for president at that age. But it is one of those things, that's a bad joke, by the way, but it is one of those things where this process is not easy, but at least it's completely straightforward. And I think the mindset shift is the most important thing. You're not trying to figure out what I'm retiring from, get away from this horrible job. You're trying to know where you're going to and planning accordingly. And that's why I love that we got to give a shout out to some of those other content creators that are really putting a lot of interest, experience shares into shedding light on what it takes to do that successfully. And this is, you just let your money build financial independence for you in the background. Your army of dollar bills can work harder for you. And then really, wealth is the freedom to focus on what you value and owning your time that much sooner. I'm your host, Brian Preston, Mr. Bo Hansen. Money Guy Team, out.